Rain came down hard that evening, hammering against the sleek black limousine as it crawled through the narrow city streets. The windshield wipers fought uselessly against the storm, while traffic snarled around them. Inside the car, a man in a dark suit sat silently, staring at his phone. His name was Richard Langford, the richest man in the country, maybe even the world. But behind the wealth, his face looked empty. "Sir, should I pull over?" his driver asked, eyes on the blurry road. "No, keep driving," Richard muttered. His voice was calm but sharp, cold enough to cut through the noise of the rain. Another flash of lightning split the sky. The car jolted suddenly, then slowed to a stop with a low sputter. The driver cursed under his breath. "Engine's gone, sir." "Flooded," Richard sighed. "Of course it is." He grabbed his umbrella and stepped out of the car. The rain hit his tailored coat instantly. Water splashed over his polished shoes. He looked around, irritated. They had stopped under an old bridge, dark, silent, and forgotten. Then, from the shadows came a small voice. "Sir, do you need help?" Richard turned sharply. A boy, no older than 12, stood a few feet away, barefoot and soaked from head to toe. His hair was dripping, his shirt torn, but his eyes, they were bright. He held a broken umbrella, more whole than cloth, and smiled gently. "Go away," Richard snapped. The boy hesitated. "But you're getting wet, sir." "I said go away." The boy lowered his umbrella but didn't move. Instead, he looked at the car, then at Richard. "Maybe I can help push it?" Richard frowned. "You? Push a limousine?" The boy nodded, stepping behind the car before Richard could stop him. His small hands pressed against the bumper as he pushed with all his might. The driver got out and joined him, and after a few hard shoves, the car's engine coughed back to life. The boy smiled through the rain, panting. "See? It works now." Richard just stared, speechless for a moment. "Let's go, sir," the driver said, sliding into the car. Richard hesitated, then turned back to the boy. "Why did you help me?" The boy shrugged. "You needed help. I didn't pay you." "I didn't ask for money," the boy said softly. "You looked tired." Richard blinked. Before he could say another word, the boy turned and disappeared into the rain. Back in the car, Richard couldn't focus. That face, that voice, kept echoing in his head. "You looked tired." When was the last time someone had said that to him without wanting something? The next morning, Richard sat in his glass-walled office, high above the city. His assistant, Clara, was updating him about a merger. He interrupted mid-sentence. "Clara, find a boy for me." She blinked. "A boy, sir?" "Yes, around 12. Homeless, near the old stone bridge downtown. Brown hair, bright eyes. Sir, there are hundreds of kids there." "Then start with one," Richard said, his tone final. "I'll pay whatever it takes." 3 days later, Clara entered his office holding a photograph. "We think this is him." Richard took the picture. It was the same boy, sitting on the sidewalk, feeding stray dogs with pieces of bread, smiling like the world was still beautiful. "That's him," Richard said. "Bring him here." Later that afternoon, the boy stood in the marble lobby of Langford Mansion, eyes wide. He looked like a raindrop that had fallen into a world made of gold. "What's your name?" Richard asked. "Eli, sir." "Eli what?" "Just Eli." "I don't know the rest," the boy said with a shrug. Richard nodded slowly. "You live on the streets?" "Yes, sir." "Under the bridge." "I help the soup kitchen sometimes." "You don't steal?" Eli shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I just collect bottles and cans." "I work a little. Why didn't you ask for money that night?" Eli looked down. "Because you didn't need money, sir. You just needed help." Richard sat back, studying him. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. "Have you eaten?" Eli smiled shyly. "Not yet, sir." Richard turned to his butler. "Bring him food." "Whatever he wants." Eli's eyes lit up. When the meal came, bread, soup, and some fruit, he ate slowly, savoring every bite. "Good?" Richard asked. Eli nodded, mouth full. "So soft. Bread on the street's always hard." Richard almost laughed. It felt strange, laughing. When Eli finished, he folded the napkin carefully. "Thank you, sir. That was the best food I've ever had." Richard hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to work here? Help in the garden, maybe? Or around the house?" Eli's eyes went wide. "Work? Me? For real?" "Yes, you've got energy. I could use that." Tears glistened in the boy's eyes. "Thank you, sir. I'll work hard, I promise." That night, Eli was given a small room near the servants' quarters. Just a bed and a blanket, but to him, it felt like heaven. Richard watched from the balcony as the boy peeked out of his window, staring in awe at the night sky. Something about that small frame, that fragile hope, stirred something buried deep inside him. The next morning, Richard came down for breakfast and stopped in surprise. Eli was already awake, scrubbing the floor. "You're up early," Richard said. Eli grinned. "Couldn't sleep much. The bed was too soft, sir." Richard chuckled. "You can rest a little." "It's early. I like mornings," Eli said. "It's when the world feels new again." That simple line lingered with Richard all day. While people in suits talked about numbers and deals, his mind kept drifting to the boy polishing floors at sunrise. Later that evening, Richard returned home exhausted. As he stepped out of the car, he heard laughter near the fountain. Eli was there, playing with the security guards, trying to teach one how to skip stones in the water. Richard found himself smiling before he realized it. When Eli saw him, he ran up. "Sir, I made dinner with the cook." "Want to try?" Richard blinked. "You cooked?" "Just helped," Eli said proudly. "But I think it's good." He followed the boy inside. The meal was simple: rice, beans, and some chicken. But it smelled good. Richard took a bite. It was warm, honest, real. "Not bad," he said. Eli's grin widened. "I told you. I'm a chef now." Richard laughed softly. "Maybe you are." For the first time in a long while, the mansion didn't feel so cold. That night, Richard sat by the window in silence. He had no idea why a street boy was changing the air around him, but he could feel it happening. And for once, he didn't want to stop it. The following weeks passed quietly, but something inside the Langford mansion had shifted. The staff noticed it first. Laughter echoing down the hallways, music playing in the kitchen, the sound of small footsteps running past the marble floors. Eli had become the heart of the house without even trying. He smiled at everyone, talked to everyone, and somehow made even the coldest mornings feel warm. One morning, as Richard prepared to leave for a business meeting, Eli came running down the stairs, clutching a crumpled paper. "Sir, wait." Richard paused, half smiling. "You'll make me late, boy." Eli stopped in front of him, out of breath. "I drew this for you." He handed over a shaky pencil sketch. It was the mansion, with Richard standing beside it, holding hands with a small boy. Above them, Eli had written in big letters, "Home." Richard stared at it for a long time, his throat tightening. "You drew this?" "Yes, sir. I thought maybe you needed one too." "One what?" "A home," Eli said quietly. Richard swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, but nothing came out. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp note, and offered it. "You didn't have to do this." "Here." Eli shook his head. "No, sir. It's not for money." Something inside Richard cracked open a little more. That day at work, he couldn't focus. The sketch lay folded in his coat pocket, whispering to him. All his life he had built towers, companies, empires, but that single word, home, was something he'd never truly owned. When he returned that evening, he found Eli waiting by the door with a flashlight. "You're late, sir." "I was worried." Richard smiled faintly. "You sound like a parent." Eli grinned. "Then you better eat." I helped the cook again. As they sat down, Richard finally asked, "Eli, do you remember your parents?" Eli's smile faded. He stared at his plate for a moment. "No, sir. Not really. They died when I was little. I remember the sound of a lullaby sometimes, but not their faces." Silence filled the room. The rain started again outside, soft, steady, like a memory. Richard leaned back, his voice low. "I lost someone too. My wife. 10 years ago. I buried myself in work after that." Eli looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "That's why your eyes look tired." Richard laughed softly through his pain. "You're far too honest, Eli." "I just tell the truth," the boy said simply. "You look happier now, though. You laugh more. Because of you." Eli blinked. "Me?" Richard nodded slowly. "You remind me that life isn't all numbers and deals. You remind me of kindness." Eli smiled shyly and went back to eating, pretending not to notice the tears in the billionaire's eyes. The days turned into months. Richard enrolled Eli in a private school nearby. The first day, Eli came home wearing a clean uniform and holding a stack of books taller than his chest. "How was school?" Richard asked. Eli's face glowed. "They have real desks. And computers. And I made a friend named Noah. He said he's never met someone who lived under a bridge before." Richard smiled faintly. "You told him that?" "Of course," Eli said proudly. "That's my story. You always say we shouldn't hide who we are." Richard chuckled. "Seems you listen to me more than my business partners do." That evening, Richard walked past the boy's room and paused at the door. Eli was asleep, one hand resting on a book, his breathing soft and peaceful. Richard whispered, "Good night, son," before walking away, and for the first time in years, he felt the word son mean something again. But life, as it often does, had its way of testing happiness. One chilly morning, news broke that Langford Industries was being investigated. A rival company had accused Richard of fraud, false documents, hidden assets, tax evasion. It wasn't true, but it spread fast. Reporters surrounded the mansion gates. Investors pulled out. Overnight, the billionaire's empire began to crumble. Inside the house, chaos erupted. Staff whispered. Phones rang endlessly. Richard sat alone in his study, staring at his shaking hands. Eli pushed open the door quietly. "Sir?" Richard didn't look up. "You should go to school, Eli." "Not today," the boy said softly. "Everyone's scared. Are you in trouble?" Richard finally raised his head. "It's complicated. People think I did bad things. But I didn't." Eli walked closer. "Then why are you hiding?" Richard sighed. "Because when people believe lies, truth becomes a whisper." Eli stood beside him, placing a small hand on his arm. "Then we'll shout louder." Richard looked at him, startled. "What?" Eli smiled. "You always tell me not to give up. So don't give up now." That small voice, that fearless tone gave Richard a strange strength. 2 weeks later, the scandal worsened. Properties were frozen. Stocks crashed. One night, the housekeeper entered the study in tears. "Sir, they're taking the mansion." Eli overheard and ran in. "They can't. This is your home." Richard knelt beside him, his voice breaking. "I built everything on money, Eli, and money can disappear overnight." Eli shook his head fiercely. "Then build again, this time with people, not things." Richard pulled him into a tight hug. "You talk like you're 50, not 12. Eli smiled weakly. "You talk like you're still sad." The boy didn't care about the news, or the money, or the cameras outside. He only cared about the man who'd given him a bed, food, and kindness. When everything finally collapsed, when the mansion gates closed for good, Eli stood beside Richard holding his hand. "Where will we go?" Eli asked. Richard looked down at him. "I don't know." Eli smiled faintly. "That's okay. I used to not know every day." That broke Richard completely. He knelt, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Eli. I wanted to protect you from this world." Eli touched his cheek. "You already did. You gave me love. That's more than the world ever gave me." They walked out together, side by side, through the rain. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but Richard didn't care anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Months passed since Richard Langford lost everything. The skyscrapers he once owned now had someone else's name on them. The mansion stood empty, but strangely, he didn't feel broken, just lighter. He and Eli had moved into a small apartment above a bakery. It wasn't much. A creaky floor, 1 bathroom, 2 beds squeezed side by side. But it was theirs. Richard worked at the bakery downstairs, kneading dough in the mornings, while Eli went to the public school nearby. Sometimes, people recognized him. "Aren't you that billionaire?" they'd whisper. Richard would just smile and say, "Used to be." Every evening he waited at the bakery window, watching the street for Eli. The boy would come running with his backpack, face glowing. "Guess what, sir?" "Richard," he'd correct gently. "You can call me Richard now." Eli grinned. "Guess what, Richard? I got first in my class." Richard laughed and lifted him in a hug. "Of course you did. You're unstoppable." Their days were simple but full of laughter. Sometimes they sat by the riverbank, the same one where they'd met, throwing pebbles into the water. Eli once asked, "Do you miss it? The cars, the mansion, all that?" Richard watched the water flow. "I used to think money could fix everything. Now I know it can't buy peace or love." Eli nodded. "But it can buy pizza." Richard laughed until tears filled his eyes. "Yes, it can buy pizza, but peace never comes without a final test." One afternoon, while Richard was cleaning the bakery shelves, a man in a suit walked in. His voice was sharp, businesslike. "Mr. Langford?" Richard turned, startled. "Yes?" The man extended a card. "I'm with the Financial Bureau. We've reviewed your case. The fraud charges were false. You've been cleared completely." Richard froze. "What?" The man nodded. "The evidence points to your former partner. He's already confessed. Everything you lost, it's yours again." For a moment, Richard couldn't move. The world around him blurred. After the man left, he sat down heavily, hands trembling. His fortune, his empire, all of it could return. But when he looked around, at the warm smell of bread, at the laughter coming from upstairs, he realized something. He didn't miss that life anymore. That evening, he told Eli everything. The boy's eyes widened. "So we're rich again?" Richard chuckled. "Technically, yes." Eli jumped up and down. "Then we can buy the mansion back." And Richard stopped him gently. "Eli, do you like this life?" Eli blinked. "Of course. It's happy." "Then let's keep it," Richard said softly. I don't need a palace anymore. I already found my home. Eli froze for a moment, then hugged him tight. You mean me, right? Richard smiled through tears. You. Always you. The next morning, Richard did something that made headlines again, but for a completely different reason. He donated every company, every property, every remaining share to an orphan foundation. He named it the Eli Hope Trust. When reporters asked why, he simply said, "Because one homeless boy reminded me what it means to be human." The story spread everywhere. News channels called it the Billionaire Redemption. Social media called it the Miracle Boy. But for Richard and Eli, it was just life. Quiet, honest, beautiful. Years later, Eli stood on a stage, wearing a graduation gown. Richard sat proudly in the front row, his hands trembling with emotion. When Eli stepped up to the microphone, he looked directly at him. People call me lucky, but luck didn't save me. Love did. A man once told me that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay. The audience clapped, but Richard's eyes blurred with tears. After the ceremony, Eli ran to him. "We did it, Richard." Richard hugged him tight. "No, Eli. You did it." Eli grinned. "We both did. You taught me to believe. I taught you to feel. That's teamwork." Richard laughed. "You sound like a businessman now." Eli smirked. "Maybe I'll be one. But not the kind who forgets people." That night they went back to the river, the same old bridge where everything began. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the rain fell softly. Eli looked up. "Do you ever wonder why I helped you that night?" Richard smiled. "I've thought about it every day." Eli chuckled. "I didn't help you because you were rich. I helped you because you looked lost. I knew that look." Richard turned to him, eyes warm. "And you saved me." Eli shook his head. "No, Richard. We saved each other." They sat there in silence, the rain pattering softly around them as the river carried their reflections away. Two lives that had once been strangers, now forever intertwined. After a while, Eli whispered, "Do you think Mom would be proud?" Richard looked at him. "Who's Mom?" Eli smiled faintly. "Mine. And maybe yours too." Richard nodded, his voice breaking. "I know they are." The boy leaned his head on his shoulder. "You know, I used to wish someone would adopt me, but I think fate adopted us both." Richard couldn't reply. He just held him, letting the moment say everything words couldn't. The rain eased, the clouds parted, and the moonlight fell on them gently. As the camera would pull back in your video, two silhouettes under the bridge, bound not by blood but by love, the narrator's voice could whisper. Sometimes, the poorest hearts give the richest lessons. A pause. The river hums. Then the final voiceover lands softly. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories that remind us that kindness still exists. And if you believe love can change the world, leave a heart emoji in the comments below. Fade out on the sound of rain and a faint echo of laughter, the kind that only comes from peace.